So we're going to talk about the Age of Exploration. What was the Age of Exploration? The time period when Europeans began to explore the rest of the world. You have improvements in map making, shipbuilding, rigging, and navigation make this possible. And of course, blue water sailing, not sailing along the coast, but getting out into the ocean where you're surrounded on all sides by water and you can't see anything but water. Of course, the policy of mercantilism drives exploration, guys. Exploration was not just where Europeans wake up one day and say, hey, I want to go explore the world. They have practical financial purposes here. And that is that the Italian city-states of Italy, they had a monopoly on the Silk Road from Asia, from China, and they were not giving it up. So Europeans of the West and North had to find a different route to Asia to get these goods. And if they crossed over into Russia and crossed the Ural Mountains, that was hazardous and it was dangerous as well. So they decided to see if there's routes by water. So that's how we get into this age of exploration. And it's really for new trade routes, to explore new trade routes. So what is mercantilism? Here it is. Basically, it's the policy that said there's a limited amount of money in the world. This is what all European nations followed at this time, not just Britain and Spain, but all of them. And each country needs to grab as much money as they can before it's all gone. The policy is to export more than you import, more money in your pocket, meaning you want to export more than you buy or import. And of course, colonies and markets were needed to keep everything in the system going. So we're going to look at some explorers here of Portugal. One name that's not up here that I do put in later for American history and stuff is Prince Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal, he actually establishes a school of navigation where all these ships captains, geographers, chartographers, and all of these people come together and they exchange information. So it helps Portugal gain the lead in exploration. And Prince Henry never sailed anywhere himself. He never hopped on a boat and did that, but he made it possible for others. And you're going to see some of the first African slaves come to Portugal under his tutelage as far as the School of Navigation. So, Bartholomew Diaz, he sails around the Cape of Good Hope, southern tip of Africa, and he found a route he found the route to the Indian Ocean. Trade can go from Europe to Asia by sea now. Here's his route, and if you look here, there's some deep water, some blue water sailing here. I don't know, maybe some here. There's islands and stuff over there, though. Vasco da Gama in 1498, he lands in India. So basically opens up trade with India and sets up trade for the East Indies. If you look, here's his route. So he follows da Gama's route. This right here is an ancient trade route between East Africa and India, this portion of his route. The Spanish explorers. The first one I'm going to talk about is Ferdinand Magellan, even though he wasn't the first to sail. As you see, he's the first to make a round trip around the globe, circumnavigate the globe, prove that it can be done. And he's actually killed in the Philippines by a Filipino poisonous arrow. I think he's shot in the foot or shot in the torso, something like that. But he ends up dying. So he doesn't even make it back. Five ships sailed out of Spain. Only one made it back. Took him a couple of years. Took him from 1519 to 1522 to complete the voyage. The next guy we're going to talk about is Christopher Columbus. Good old Christopher. We celebrate him discovering a new world and all that good stuff. He believed there was a shorter route to East Asia, and he felt like he could sail westward and get there instead of around Africa. And surprise, surprise, today we know he didn't find China or Asia. He found the Americas, but he thought he had. So going back a little bit here, He actually makes 4 trips to the New World. He lands on Hispaniola, which is Haiti and Dominican Republic today. He brings some of the first Native Americans back to Spain. He is known, he does a lot of things, but when he dies, he thought that he had found Asia, and he calls the people here Indians because he thought he was in the East Indies, and that's how we have Native American name. We call them Indians today because of his mistake, I guess. And the people he run into at first were the Taina people. They're the ones that invented the term hurricane. It's like hurricane without an E on the end. And very peaceful people. Hernan Cortez, all what we can talk about this guy. 1519 to 1521, he's a conquistador. He came to the New World to look for riches. He actually disobeys orders, and he steals a couple of ships from Cuba. He's stationed on Cuba, and he secretly invades North America. Basically, he comes here looking for riches. The Aztecs, as you see, they have a creation or an end of time story that says there's a white man coming from the east will arrive. Moctezuma II does not want to meet with this guy, but he's kind of curious himself, and he doesn't necessarily believe in the prophecy of a white man founding their civilization and a white man will come back, but lo and behold, there's a white man there. So this is the greatest case of mistaken identity in world history. He thought he was meeting a future, Moctezuma thought he was meeting a god, which Moctezuma is the leader of the Aztec people, but he's actually meeting a power-hungry, riches-thirsty European conquistador. Long story short, and it is a very interesting story, by the way, by 1521, the Aztec are completely taken over by the Spanish, and the Aztec are going to be enslaved by the Spanish. They're forced to dig in the gold mines, and all that gold is going to be sent back to Spain, setting Spain up for 100 years of unequaled wealth in Europe. Remember Tenochtitlan is today Mexico City. It's a very interesting story if you get a chance to watch a video on this. But Moctezuma is actually killed in this whole thing. So the Columbian Exchange. This is going back to Columbus. What it establishes here is a massive exchange of plants, animals, and diseases. These, as you see, these things move between the New World and the Old World. Started with Columbus. To the Americas go cows, horses, and wheat. By the way, Cortez, when he steps on land in North America, there are no horses over here, and Native Americans had never seen a horse before, so of course it makes him look more like a god figure. As you see, we also import, Europeans also import smallpox and typhoid and all that good stuff to the Native Americans. To Europe, Europeans get potatoes, tomatoes, tobacco, corn, plus a lot more. The potato is an interesting story as well, because remember, Ireland is famous for their Irish potatoes, but there are no potatoes in Ireland. They come from North America. So that's a whole, if you read up on a tomato, if you look up a potato, it's actually an interesting story, the history of the potato. So we're going to get into the slave trade here. The Portuguese are the first ones to get into it with in the 1400s, as far as taking African slaves and moving them back to Portugal. But the slave trade going across the Atlantic, as you see, Europeans began to use slaves in labor, not only in Europe but in their colonies to grow crops, mine, etc. Native Americans were used for a while, but Africans began to be brought to the Americas, and here's why. Because Europeans literally killed Native Americans off, especially the Spanish. They were extremely cruel to Native Americans. You got to remember, they didn't have to pay for a Native American to work for them, so they didn't take care of them. They worked them to death and they underfed them. And at least with African Americans, they had to pay for them, so they tried to keep them alive. Once again, I am not advocating slavery at all. It's just that bad. The slave trade then became the dominant focus for Europeans. So here's what it is in a very rough state. It's a system of trade between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Stage 1, you see raw materials going to Europe. Stage 2, manufactured goods go to Africa, like guns and rum. Stage 3, slaves come to the Americas. Here is a map, an oversimplified map. Once again, this is an oversimplified map of a very complex trading network. We